Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for October 19th, 2023. Today I'm going to take a look at the overall developing situation around the war fronts, Ukraine and the Gaza, which is still poised for an invasion from Israeli forces. But what I want to focus on a little bit is this question of the funding of these wars, your tax dollars going into the military-industrial complex war machine. And the cover story for this, the fight for democracy against authoritarians, against barbarians, with Joe Biden standing up strong for the forces of democracy in the world. And if you believe that, then you deserve to have your tax dollars go to these globalists and these corporate cartels. Because the rhetoric about standing up to terrorists, first of all, just a simple point here. It's been exposed in the Israeli press that Hamas was funded by $1 billion coming from the Israeli government through Qatar. That is, that Netanyahu has been bragging that they created and protected Hamas as a counter to the Palestinian Authority because they did not want a unified Palestinian movement that would fight for a two-state solution. So who is funding Hamas? Well, Lindsey Graham, if you want to bomb Iran, maybe you should consider bombing Israel as well. Because the kind of lunatic statements coming out on this thing represent the height of hypocrisy and to play on the ignorance of most people about what's going on here. So the idea of standing up against terrorists to allow bombs to fall on civilian populations, that was on display when Biden yesterday pledged a $100 billion new package, which would be aid for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and they're throwing in a few cents to the U.S. border. The latter part is to sweeten the pot for Republicans who don't like the war aid going to Ukraine. Now, what Biden proposed with this $100 billion, Israel has asked for $10 billion. Now, Israel already receives $3.8 billion a year in aid from the United States, despite the fact that Israel is a relatively wealthy country. But why is this put together as one package? Well, Bloomberg News had an interesting comment that it was in hopes of overcoming Republican opposition. That is, as the Republicans are beginning to feel the pressure of the population, as typified by Matt Gaetz' statement that while we're funding Ukraine at a level of $100 billion plus, we're running a $2 trillion or more a year budget deficit. So the idea being that you could use packaging the Israel war, which, as Bloomberg points out, is very popular. What Bloomberg said is that linking Israel and Ukraine together in an aid package makes sense because Israel, quote, enjoys broad bipartisan support. So it's a cynical ploy. And by throwing in a little bit for the border, they're trying to say to Republicans, if you want something on the border, vote for this $100 billion package. Now, they're also doing this as $100 billion for a year, so that it won't come up again during the election year in 2024. That is, if you do a little bit here and a little bit there, you may have budget fights throughout the year of 2024. They want to get it done, put it all together in one pot and get it done. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, said, America can afford, quote, to stand with Israel and support Israel's military needs and support Ukraine in its struggle against Russia, unquote. So that's what this $100 billion new package is about. And it seems to be working. All the Republican candidates have come out in support of aid to Israel. And there's little pushback so far on the whole package. Most interesting to me is that the two leading so-called anti-war candidates, former President Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., are totally committed now to backing Israel in the war in Gaza. Now, Trump initially had some criticism of Netanyahu and the so-called Israeli intelligence failure, saying that this is on them, this was bad. And he was immediately attacked by Mike Pence and Nikki Haley, among others, and Chris Christie. But then Trump went to Iowa and gave a speech a couple of days ago. And here's what he said: "We will fully support Israel. I stood with Israel like no president in history." He said, "I even recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights," referring to the area Israel took from Syria in the 1967 war. He said, "I will stand with Israel 100%. And he posted on Truth Social, hashtag I stand with Israel and hashtag I stand with Bibi, referring to Netanyahu, so obviously mending the fence for his criticism of Netanyahu. And he said there was no better friend or ally of Israel than President Donald Trump. Now, whatever happened to the slogan, "He kept us out of war"? In doing this, in making this shift, he's siding with the war hawks who are going to use this to continue the war in Ukraine. Now, the other one is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who announced total support, full support for Israel. And this has led to it's suspected that this led to some frictions within his campaign. His campaign manager, Dennis Kucinich, who's always been a strong supporter of Palestinian self-determination, announced last Friday that he's leaving the campaign. There's no confirmation of that, but it's clear that he doesn't want to be seen as supporting a candidate who is supposedly anti-war, but seems to be totally committed to this war in the Middle East. Now, as this is going on, and as Americans' heads are spinning, not only a two-front war now, but possibly a three-front war, because the push against China is continuing. So while this is going on, what's happening in Beijing? There's an incredible conference. 150 nations are attending the Belt and Road Initiative conference, where they're signing close to $1 trillion in deals. Discussion of expanding the Belt and Road Initiative, the corridor, the transportation corridors, port facilities for the maritime Silk Road, feeling of excitement and happiness about using science and technology, and credit, funding through various international institutions that will enable countries to overcome the lack of development that has been typified, especially in Africa, but also in Asia and South America, by the policies of the international banks of withholding credit for the development of these countries. So you have this perspective of peace through development. And there was a very excellent keynote speech by Xi Jinping. I don't have time to go through it today, but I'll probably have excerpts from it for you tomorrow. And who is the special guest speaker after China's President Xi? None other than Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, who was very well received. So much for the line of the isolation of Putin and Russia, when he was received enthusiastically by leaders of 150 nations. So what are we to make of this? The contrast between these two situations. One, where people like former Prime Minister Bennett of Israel is saying there's going to have to be a lot of bloodshed. Or Netanyahu, who said, "We will exact revenge." Revenge, which is part of a cycle, because once you carry out a blind revenge, you prepare the way for the next reaction against you. This is in direct contrast to the idea of development, cooperating for development as the means of achieving peace. And this is the subject of a Schiller Institute leaflet, which I am linking in on the description page, of Westphalia, not Versailles. Westphalia referring to the idea that you act with love for the other as a way of overcoming hatred and rejecting revenge. And how do you do that? Economic cooperation is the best way in the modern world. And that's been the approach of Lyndon LaRouche and our movement for the 50 plus years that I've known him. So you have this contrast between the call for war, which you're going to have to pay for, not just in your tax dollars, but for the bad will it's going to spread against the United States worldwide. Or the United States and Europe could join with the rest of the world for cooperation for economic development. That's the question in front of us. And ultimately, it will be decided by what the American population and the people of Western Europe and Eastern Europe decide to do. Tomorrow's Friday. I'll take your questions. You can send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com. Also, your comments. If you disagree with me and you want to pick a fight, bring it on, because we have to have the discussions that can give people a clear perspective on how human beings can overcome these kinds of crises without spilling a lot of blood. So join me tomorrow. Send me your questions at harleysch@gmail.com.